Good evening, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. Hope you're all doing very well tonight. We're playing some more Golgari Midrange for you in a competitive league in replay format. My last video, people seemed to like the replay format with all 5 leagues all edited together, and I've been super busy lately. I was hoping my life would get a little less busy, and it was supposed to, but it's been crazy. So if I have like just a couple hours, I've been trying to just play a whole league because that's all the time I have. I don't have time to play one at a time like I do when I'm live recording. So this is why it's great to have the replays back. We're going to continue to do both. So I got one more league in since I saw you last, and here it is. Before we start off, let's thank all of our patrons. Thank you all, guys, so much for supporting this content. I truly, truly appreciate it. And remember, if you are not subscribed on the YouTube channel, please do so. So we've won the die roll, we are on the play, and our hand is pretty strong. Pretty strong hand in a blind game 1. It lacks a threat besides Hissing Quagmire, but we're still going to keep it. Opponent likes their 7 as well. We open on the Inquisition, and our life is ruined on turn 1 of match 1, of game 1 of match 1 of this league, because we see our literal worst matchup, Living End. So, Living End is a horrifyingly bad matchup because, for those of you who don't know, they just cycle. They have a bunch of 1-mana cycling cards, draft commons, and they play 7 to 8 cascade spells, and every single card in their deck is CMC 3 or more, including those cascade spells at CMC 3. So they'll always cascade into Living End. They have a graveyard full of creatures. They get to bring them all back for free with Living End while wiping our board. The reason this is so hard is because it's very resilient to our interaction. Discard is not good against them unless you poach a cascade spell. Fatal Push doesn't hit much, and we also don't have a fast enough clock to realistically erase them. And it's just very, very bad. They're extremely consistent as well. It's a 1-card combo, so for all of these reasons, it's very bad for us. Our Inquisition can take Fulminator Mage, which we're familiar with, and Fairy Macabre, which is a little bit of main deckable Grave Hate. It's a free pitch to a Living End. It's a free creature they can cheat back out, and it also does a little bit of work in terms of main deck Grave Hate, but we care more about the Fulminator, so we'll take that. Fulminator is incredible in that deck, by the way, because they can Stone Rain with it, and then get it back with their Living End and do it again. So, very bad matchup for us, like I just said. But what can we do but play it out? So here, like I said, we need to clock them, so Tireless Tracker is at least a threat. We have to play her on turn 3, in my opinion. Therefore, it does make some sense to Thoughtseize now. Again, just on the off chance we're going to get them take away a Cascade spell. That doesn't happen, so we just take away their free Cycler, which was the Street Wraith, and we play our Hissing Quagmire so that we can get the Tireless Tracker down next turn. So they rip a Swamp, they'll pass, and we're going to play our Tracker and pass. Now, they get to cycle both horrors, very good for them. It's worth noting that Demonic Dread is one of their Cascade spells. Demonic Dread needs a creature on the field to target in order to be a legal target, and it is sorcery speed. Maybe in some really corner case scenarios it makes you not want to play your creature, but we simply can't afford to just not play a creature, you know? Like, they just get to keep cycling that way, and they'll eventually find the Violent Outburst, which does not need a target. So, I think as unlikely as it is that this gets us there, we need to just play our creature and start turning it sideways. We're flooding, but that's fine with a Tracker on board, I guess. Obviously looking for some stuff like Nile Spellbomb or Scavenging Ooze. That's why we'll crack this main phase, and we're finding more lands. Not great. So here we just hit in with the Tracker and pass, holding up Assassin's Trophy. Opponent is going to play a Fulminator Mage. Alright, so they're at the point where they're kind of out of cyclers and they're having to hardcast things from their hand, so this gives us a glimmer of hope. Now, here in the end step, as bad as it is, we are pretty much forced to spend trophy on Fulminator Mage. I say that's very bad because Fatal Push is almost entirely dead, and it would be nice to have the ability to push this Fulminator, but we don't, so that's fine. We've just got to clear the way so we can keep getting in in our desperate attempt to end this game. We don't ramp them because they Stone Rain us in response. Sure. Untap and draw Scavenging Ooze, so that's a pretty good one. It's a pretty good draw. And we're going to go right ahead and shock in. Our life total is not that relevant. And we get to crash in for 4. Scooz was a very good draw. Very good draw, to be sure. And we will pass. The opponent fetches on the end step. I'm not sure why I'm having to click multiple times to get this to go, so I might be right-clicking through the turn a little bit more if this doesn't change. Fairy Macabre. So once again, they're having to hardcast things. Very good for us, gives us a glimmer of hope. End step, we're going to grow our Scooz. The reason we did that instead of cracking the clue is more mana efficient, but we need to save the clue crack for this turn so we can get Revolt and push that fairy away and keep clocking. So we'll play our Field of Ruin because it enters untapped, and that allows us to do everything we want to do here. And unfortunately, we are just 1 damage shy from getting in and ending the game. All we have to do, though, is fade this draw step. If they don't rip a Cascade spell off the top, we win. And they rip a Cascade spell off the top, so we lose. That's Living End. They go nice and wide. We're at 20 life, and they have a not that impressive of a board, so we're not technically dead, so we play it out, but flooding like crazy. Not only is it our actual worst matchup, we are just flooding like crazy. And we continue the flood, so, you know, we're not technically dead, so we make them play, but we're pretty much dead, right? So they get to turn their whole board sideways, they hardcast a Street Wraith, and we're at 7, we find a Bob. That's going to do it. That's going to be game. So we're going to fire up the Hissing Quagmire, make sure they don't misclick with the block, because they are at 1 life, but, yep. Bob and pass. We're just dead. We make them play it out, so, to test their skills at hitting attack all, turning them all sideways, and indeed they got us, so, ooh, that's kind of a 1-2 punch. Number 1, seeing our worst possible matchup right out of the gates in this league, and number 2, having the carrot of success kind of dangled in front of our noses got them all the way down to 1. There were a million different ways that could have been lethal, too. If they had had to fetch one more time, maybe if we had had more green mana, I don't know. For Scooz, I don't know. A little earlier on, I need to look back at that. But so close yet so far. Obviously, we had a couple live draws of Collective Brutality there as well. Even after they Living Ended us, we could have just ripped a Collective Brutality off the top and killed them. So we very nearly stole Game 1 from Living End. Unfortunately, we did not get them. This is a matchup that does improve post-side, but perhaps not as much as other graveyard decks get better for us post-side. But we still have some really good things to do, so let's check that out. Alright, my friends, here we are figuring out how to sideboard against Living End. The first thing to know about sideboarding against Living End is that Grafdigger's Cage does not do anything. For those who don't know, the templating of Living End makes it so that the creatures that are in the graveyard first exit the graveyard and go into exile, and then from exile, they enter the battlefield with all of the creatures on board getting wiped in between those, as I recall. Note that the text on Grafdigger's Cage does literally nothing against that. It is a common mistake. I'm sure most of you know not to side in Grafdigger's Cage, but it is well worth pointing out in case even one person watching this doesn't know that. Grafdigger's Cage doesn't stop Living End, so definitely keep that one in mind. However, the rest of our graveyard hate is pretty good. We do want the spell bombs. We do want the extraction. Collective Brutality, even though discard is not great, we're going to bring this in because it can drain them, and it can poach the cascade spells out of their hand. I'll explain the difference when we look at what comes out. Otherwise, Languish is going to take care of most of their board, so I think we do want that. It kind of forces them to find another living end, and then we maybe get some stuff back that can keep the board stabilized. Damnation's better, but I think Languish is good. Mainly the big problem with Languish is if they have some Horrors of the Broken Lands and they have a card to cycle in response, it doesn't kill them. So, still, we'll bring it in. Maelstrom Pulses is okay removal if we force them into like a medium-sized living end. And you could probably consider Kitchen Finks as well, because it does come back, but it's just pretty undersized. Our life total doesn't matter that much. Fulminator Mage, however, that's a card we want. That's a card we want because it's just for the same reason they use it. We can sack it with the living end on the stack, get some value, and then get it back. It's not bad. And it's also a way to just win the game, stone rain them out of the game. So, you could maybe consider Nissa as well if you don't have as much of this stuff as I have to bring in, and maybe there's enough bad stuff. We don't want anything else, so let's bring in that big pile. We've got a couple maybe board cards as well to consider, but we've got a lot of really bad stuff. The Fatal Pushes, we saw more targets than usual last game, and they were still pretty bad. So Fatal Pushes, Abrupt Decay, the stuff can come out. The Planeswalkers we have are all... It's a rare matchup where both Lilianas are bad, but here both Lilianas are bad. Veil actively helps them in some ways, and Last Hope is just too small to do much. And buying a creature back from the graveyard doesn't make sense when their whole goal is to return all creatures in all graveyards to the field. So, Last Hope and Veil don't really do much of anything here. And yeah, that's pretty much what we're looking to do. That's, that leaves us with one card to bring in. I don't think anything else is too bad here from the main deck. Like I said, I'll talk about in discard for a second. Thoughtseize and Inquisition are sometimes bad. They're bad-ish because, in a way, they mana ramp them by actively putting a creature into their yard if we don't have another legal take that they didn't have to spend money on. Mana. On the other hand, it denies them a draw. So, you could go either way with that in evaluating that, but discard is definitely not great. Still better than most of this stuff, for sure, though. So, you can bring in another card. You can maybe bring in Nissa just as a clock that doesn't get killed by Living End, or you can bring in Kitchen Finks for something that comes back and can clog up the board and buy you time. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Maybe we like Nissa on the play, Finks on the draw, but either way, I would be looking to do something like that against our worst matchup. So, at least we have a lot of changes to make, and let's go to Game 2. Alright, my friends, Game 2 against Living End, and our hand is pretty good. Scooz on the play is great, and Fulminator could be useful. Inquisition might be hit or miss, but we're certainly not going to throw this hand back. Trophy is whatever. Trophy's not great, but, in the context of our hand, it could be serviceable. So we're going to Inquisition them, and we whiff. Pretty horrifyingly tough hand to beat, because our Inquisition doesn't do anything for us, so we basically start off down a card, and because they have a Shriekmaw. This is a wonderful answer to Scavenging Ooze. It kills the Scooz, and then it's going to come back and kill the Scooz again after they Living End. Very, very bad for us. They have very functional mana, so our Fulminator plan is not looking good. They have a Cascade effect, which Bloodbraid Elf, it can hit other things, so whatever, but they do have a Cascade effect that we whiff on, and they have a Cycler, their best attacker. So, all things considered, that was about as bad as it could get for us, and opponent's just going to play a land and pass. So, we draw Blooming Marsh, not a good draw, and I don't think we're supposed to just run this Scooz out into the known Shriekmaw, so my new plan is to Fulminator next turn, and then maybe try to Scooz on turn 4. Opponent's just going to make another Blackcleave Cliffs and pass, wisely not exposing their green land, which was definitely something I was hoping to be able to hit. But, we'll just play our Fulminator Mage and pass. So my thinking here was, like, Stone Raining them immediately. We're probably not going to land Destruction them out of the game unless we rip more Fulminators. So I wanted to see what they did on the end step. If they didn't really have any cyclers, I was going to use this as a Grey Ogre, but they cycled twice on the end step, pitching a Street Wraith and a Monstrous Carabid, and that's already a board I can't beat. So I think I had no choice here, or maybe rather it was the correct choice to upkeep Stone Rain them. That way, they're just not going off this turn, right? So could have gone either way here. I chose to run out the Ooze. You know, maybe I could have held it another turn, but the Inquisition was a very poor draw because it just means it's likely to blank again. It can't take anything we care about, so we're basically forcing them to spend their turn Shriek Mawing instead of potentially going off. You know, because, again, they could have a 3-mana Cascade spell in hand, and we're hoping to draw more Grave Hate here. Of course we don't. We draw Assassin's Trophy. Pretty bad. And now I'm thinking, alright, my best hope is that they don't play Basic Mountain. If they don't play Basic Mountain in their deck, which is the least likely Basic to be played, we might be able to put something together. But, of course, they have the Basic Mountain, so then we'll Inquisition. We see they have a red land in hand anyway, a couple Fulminators. They've got another Shriek Maw. This is all, like, you're seeing why this matchup is so bad, right? So we just decided to go all in on the trophies. Hopefully, maybe somehow in some weird world, you know, continuing to keep them off of lands. And they went for a Fulminator here instead of the Bloodbraid, right? So that's potentially decent for us, but then we just draw Swamp. So we're going to sandbag that land. They're going to Stone Rain our Hissing Quagmire. And then they're going to make a land drop. They're going to go for the Bloodbraid. They do cascade into a Violent Outburst, which cascades them into a Living End, which just does all kinds of really bad stuff. There's no creatures to eat with the Scavenging Ooze. So all very, very bad. Now at this point, we'll just take the trade with Fulminator. And we're basically looking for like a Languish here. But opponent, this was a good play from the opponent. They're going to upkeep double Stone Rain us, so now a Languish is no longer live. We could have played Tracker there. Whatever. That doesn't trade with anything, right? This thing has Fear, this thing has Swamp Walk, and these things are too big. So in my opinion, it's better to hold up Trophy. Trophy away the Ceradon. And then the opponent hardcasts another big dummy, and we draw Fulminator Mage. Might as well play the Fulminator, because again, Tracker doesn't trade with anything, so here at least we can chump and then Stone Rain, so we're just trying to play correctly. But insult to injury, our opponent rips a haste threat off the top that cascades them into Demonic Dread to make our Fulminator unable to block. So that was just like, they just had a stylish kill on us. They definitely didn't need to do that, but they sure did. So very demoralizing start to the league, my friends, because we ran into our toughest matchup. We were so close to stealing game one, and if we can steal game one, maybe we have enough Grave Hate over the course of 2 sideboard games to deal with this deck, but having to win both post-side games is very tough, and this showed us exactly why. That hand was pretty unbeatable with our hand. Maybe if we had a Nile Spellbomb, we could have done it, but that was absolutely the nut draw, almost, at least in terms of how well insulated they were from our stuff. The Shriek Maw to answer our Skoos, the high land count with a wide spread of colors to answer our Fulminators, and our Inquisitions were blanking, and so on and so forth. Not good at all, my friends, not good at all. So we start out the league 0-1, getting taken down by Living End, our worst matchup. So that is what it is. It's not a matchup you should expect to beat, and thankfully it's not very present in the meta. So what can we do but move on to game 2? I'll see you there. Alright, my friends, here we are for round 2, and our opponent has kept 7. We are on the draw with a 6-land hand, and as good as Bob is, Excuse me, I think we definitely mull that one. This is a much more feasible 6. This is a pretty strong 6, and we've got the third land that we want to see, so we'll leave that on top. Opponent goes Gemstone Mine into Sakura Tribe Scout, so this is Amulet Titan. A kill spell for the Scout might be nice here, but instead we have Inquisition. I clicked through that a little bit quickly, so we see that they are on a 2-lander. And so therefore these Sakura Tribe Scouts are not going to do all that much damage to us yet. So it's a 2-lander, but they have another Scout, a Summoner's Pact, and 2 copies of Ancient Stirrings. And I think Ancient Stirrings is the clear take here. Stirrings is the best early play right now, better than the Scout. The Pact isn't live yet. Stirrings can find them Amulet or more lands, which might even be better for them right now. So they're going to cast their other Stirrings. They find a bounce land, and they'll play the bounce land. So for the revealed section, I'm just gonna leave the lands there, right? Because they're gonna be back and forth from their hand. But I'll keep track of everything else. So they play a Sakura Tribe Scout in the second main phase. So this was actually a really interesting decision because obviously Dark Confidant is live here, but so is Collective Brutality. And it was a super, super close call for me, but I actually ended up deciding to go with the Brutality. Kill a Sakura Tribe Scout, because 2 of them are going to pressure Liliana really well, plus do their usual thing, which is going to be pretty good now that they're starting to hit a few more land drops. And so if we Brutality, we can take away the Summoner's Pact this turn, and we can kill a Sakura Tribe Scout. I chose to pitch the Thoughtseize because it's a little bit redundant with our discard effect, and with a Liliana coming down next turn, but now I see a Prime Time in hand, so I'm a little bit punished for that. However, we did deal with the Pact. They're going to play a Colony Garden and pass. We find a Scavenging Ooze, which is, whatever, not the most exciting. It's clearly Liliana of the Veil Time, and we clearly tick up here. Ticking down is bad with that plant token around, and we'll pitch the Skoos. We'd rather have Bob. If it's a premier threat like Tarmogoyf, our tracker, that can really clock well with minimal mana investment, I guess that's not true for tracker, but you know what I mean, then maybe we would pitch the Bob. But here, we pitched the Skoos. I think Bob is better. They rip a Stirrings off the top, they find a Slayer's Stronghold, and they're going to use it. This is pretty nice for them. They're going to use it to pump the Scout and hit Liliana down to 1. Pretty good. Alright, so Tarmogoyf is the draw, speaking of a premier threat, so we're going to play the Goyf, we're going to tick up the Lily, we have to pitch Bob, they have to pitch Primetime, those are the only cards left in our hands. So, now we're in the top deck war, which is a little scary against Amulet Titan, but, you know, considering everything, it wasn't that bad. They make no play, which is great for us. It's nice that they didn't have something that went to the board here, so we're going to spend our pulse on a pretty mediocre target, but that's how we get asymmetrical effect with Liliana. And they had a Summoner's Pact, so that's out of their hand. That's pretty sweet. Definitely happy about that. They rip a land. We rip a Fatal Push. Again, we might as well spend it. This makes, we kill the plant token. This makes our discard effect asymmetrical, and it clears the way for our Goyf, who is, for the second turn in a row, chunking them for 4. And they rip yet another land, so this is, this looks like it's really good for us, and in some ways it is, but remember that they can just rip a Titan off the top, and now they have the mana to actually cast it. So, a land was not great, but again, we continue with the asymmetrical Liliana effects, we continue with the Goyf Clock, and they have yet another land, so now it's starting to get good for us. Our draws have been a little bit blank the last couple turns, so we'll pitch the Thoughtseize. We crash in for 4. And the opponent scoops. So, top deck mode ended up being very much both players. You know, I found a couple removal spells. Pulse for a Sakura Tribe Scout and a Fatal Push for a plant token. Not the most impressive kills we've ever seen. However, they cleared the way for the Goyf, they let the Liliana keep ticking up, and the opponent just ripped land. So, like, they are a very high land count deck, so that'll happen, and awesome to take game 1 against Amulet Titan. Some crucial discard effects, the targeted stuff. I think that Collective Brutality play ended up being pretty good, and then, of course, Liliana of the Veil and Tarmogoyf, the amazing tandem that they are, Goyf ending the game and Liliana running them out of resources and threatening to ultimate this upcoming turn. So that's game 1 against Amulet Titan. Let's head to the sideboard, see what we do. Alright, my friends, here we are sideboarding against Amulet Titan, and let's start off with our best card, which is Fulminator Mage, or at least certainly one of the best cards, right? Absolutely incredible. Really love it. Deathmark is another good one. It's going to kill everything from Sakura Drive Scout to Azusa to Titan to random sideboard haymakers they bring in. It's definitely a really strong card in the matchup. Maelstrom Pulse, once again, can kill just about anything, including non-creature permanents. We want that. And I do like Surgical Extraction here. It's not a game-winning card necessarily, but it does have a lot of really decent targets. And as much as it can turn into a grindy value top deck war, the nature of how the games play out means that you're less likely to take card disadvantage off of this in this matchup than perhaps you are in other matchups. Just my experience, but that seems to be the case here. Anything else we want? I don't really know. If we had Damnation, we'd probably bring it in, but Languish doesn't cut it. And I don't think Engineered Explosives is quite worth it, although it can kill the amulets and some other, low curve stuff. But yeah, not so much a fan of that. And Collective Brutality, I think, is a borderline enough card that we can leave the main deck one in, but maybe leave the second one out. So how does it look if we just bring in these 6 cards? We're going to cut away a Spellbomb because it doesn't really accomplish much. Liliana, the Last Hope, also not accomplishing much. Even though she can kill those weenies, that's not really, we have other ways to do that. It's not the best thing, especially at CMC3. And from there, we need to probably just trim away at some of our less efficient threats. So Tracker is a big clock and lets us keep pace with and lets us win the top deck wars. Keep pace with card advantage, win the top deck war. Tarmogoyf is our best clock. Dark Confidant's a card advantage machine. So the odd men out are kind of Kalidas and maybe one Scavenging Ooze, I think, are our worst threats. So we can cut away 2 of those. And then Fatal Push is not necessarily the best. I think we retain access to some number of them, but I really don't know about more than a couple. So here I'm pretty happy just cutting away a couple Fatal Pushes. I think I'd rather have a Decay than a push. It can hit Amulet, it can hit Azusa without Revolt. All this other stuff is pretty much amazing, right? So this is pretty much how it would look against Amulet Titan. Let's go to game 2. Alright, my friends. Game 2 on the draw versus Titan, and opponent's gonna maul. That's a good thing, because so are we. This is a really low curve hand. It's actually not the worst possible keep I've ever seen. Inquisition, Fatal Push can all be played, and if we are on the draw, we have more chances to hit a land. We hit that second land, we're off to the races with Tarmogoyf. But even that might not be enough, right? They could just go over the top of our Inquisitions and pushes and beat us. So I chose to maul, but that hand was worth thinking about keeping, in my opinion. So anyway, opponent likes their 6, so do we. We'll keep that third land on top for Liliana of the Veil. And right now we've got a nice curve, Inquisition into Goyf into Lily, and a Deathmark still waiting in the wings. So Blooming Marsh into Inquisition is going to show us... So they played at Kabira Crossroads, mono-white ETB tapped game 2. Vesuva can copy anything. They've got the green-white bounce land, and they've got the red-white untapped painless duel that gains us life. The red-green, excuse me. So right now they don't have blue mana. They don't have any blue mana, and I think Ancient Stirrings was probably the correct take anyway, but that really seals it that it was the correct take for me. Now, Trinket Mage is a concern, right, because it can tutor up an Amulet, or it can tutor up Engineered Explosives, but, again, they can't cast it yet. At least our threats are diverse along the curve, so... And they just rip an Amulet off the top anyway. So, definitely glad I did not take the Trinket Mage there. So, I chose to fetch here, and play the Tarmogoyf. to grow it in case that mattered. And they're going to rip an Ancient Stirrings off the top. Very nice for them. They find a Simic Growth Chamber, so now they've got a bunch of dual lands. Those finds were pretty nice. Finding Amulet, then finding Stirrings to get a second dual is pretty nice. And sure enough, here comes the Trinket Mage. Their mana has been fixed. They've got an EE. So, Field of Ruins, you know, these are potentially decent draws, and indeed, that's what I chose to do. Rather than run out the Liliana, I chose to take them down a mana, to potentially take them back off blue, and to Fatal Push the Trinket Mage, and to grow my Goyf to a 4/5. So, while Liliana was the obvious play, I actually think that was a pretty good one. Partially because, you know, the Trinket Mage has a respectable 2/2 body. This guy can pressure Liliana pretty well. We definitely don't want to just stand behind our Tarmogoyf. That's very bad against this deck. We need to turn it sideways and clock them. So, that's why I took the line that I did. And let's see what the opponent does here. EE on 2, gain a couple life, and that's going to do it. So, Field of Ruin. Liliana of the Veil, we're going to tick up, pitch another land, we hold on to our Death Mark, and we clock for 4. So now it's kind of a Liliana game. We know our Goyf is going to die whenever they choose, basically. They play a Sakura Tribe Scout, they play a bounce land, and they're going to pass holding up EE. Alright, we draw a land, not the most exciting draw at all, but at least we can empty our hand cleanly and get an asymmetrical effect going with Liliana. So for that reason, I'm going to kill this thing with Deathmark, and then I'm going to move to attacks. This is going to make our opponent wonder if we have another 2-drop to follow up Tarmogoyf with. If we do, they should hold the EE. And they do hold the EE, so we get in basically 4 free points of damage. Now we get to empty our hand, take up the Lily, get a forest out of their hand, and on the end step they will go ahead and crack EE. And then, so we set a stop on their draw step, and we're going to draw step, hit the Sanctuary. We're just going to keep setting them back on mana, and doing it on the draw step, we already know they have seen 1 forest. They probably only play 3 in their deck, so it's unlikely but possible that, you know, we're going to get them by doing these types of effects on the draw step rather than the upkeep or what have you. But they do have a forest to fetch. They do have another land drop to make. Let's update this. And yeah, so they have just 1 unknown in hand, and, well, we're just ripping lands. Pretty annoying. Like, now would be such a good time for a threat. Imagine a Tireless Tracker here, or just about anything else, right? So, we're going to slightly thin out our deck by fetching on the end step. We're going to leave 1 up in case we need to revolt, and oh, what a tilt. Yet another land. So, I thought about it for a while here. Really did think about it for a while, but I chose, like, Fulminator Mage is so good against them, and this is going to be potentially a double Fulminator Mage. Now, you know, you could argue for playing the Forest, taking her up 1 more time. Obviously, that was live. You could also argue against what I did here. I might have rated Amulet of Vigor a little bit too highly. Whoops, sorry about that. Might have rated Amulet of Vigor a little bit too highly. Maybe I should have just given them their 2 worst lands plus the Amulet. But, you know, I figured basically no matter how this works out, this is pretty good for me, as long as I can draw a threat. And if I can't draw a threat, it's pretty bad for me anyway. So, Thoughtseize at least is not a dead draw. We see Primetime and Summoner's Pact. I actually took the Summoner's Pact there. Again, we're hoping to find another Liliana, more threat, something, before they can make any land drops. So, we're both just doing nothing. They're not finding lands, I'm finding lands. This is a little ridiculous. I find a Thoughtseize, which, okay, better than a land, but my god. We're just blanking for so long. So EE, Titan, Rurik Thar, they're still only on 3 mana. Still only on 3 mana. I therefore chose to take away the EE. They can set it on 2 or 3 right now, so that kind of answers any threat we have. And but I'm starting to get punished for it, because as soon as I take away the EE and leave the fatties, they rip a bounce land. Pretty bad for me. Pretty bad for me, and we are just flooding like nobody's business. So We'll play out one of these fetch lands, and we'll pass. And they rip another bounce land, so we are max punished for our decisions. At basically every turn, at every point since we ulted the Liliana, we've been max punished. So once more, we'll thin out a little bit here. And then we find a Liliana who, you know, that's a pretty good draw, to be honest, but it's still a little late to the party. I could have played Forest over Swamp there, just for Scavenging Ooze purposes, but that's a very minor thing. But yeah, so they get to make 6 mana, and they get to cast something. It's going to be a Primeval Titan. And it is going to tutor up a couple lands. So we draw yet another land. The flood is real, my friends. The flood is real. Nothing we can do about this at this stage. Opponent gets to go again, tapping out for some gigantic monstrosity here. And it's an Emrakul the Promised End, so that's even worse than the Rurik Thar, because the Rurik Thar we could at least trade our Lily for. But Emrakul the Promised End, taking control of our next turn, we draw a Fulminator Mage, so they just get to style on us here. We play they play our Fulminator, they sack it to destroy one of our lands, they cash our Lillian for no value, and we'll take our draw step, but it's a Dark Confidant, so we are just dead, dead, dead. Very, very rough. You wonder if things could have been different if I had... obviously, this is perfect hindsight, but if I had waited one more turn to ult the Lily. But obviously, there are risks to doing that, too. If I had split the piles differently, given how badly we flooded out and how well they started hitting their land drops, basically as soon as we started flooding out, I don't think taking them down to 2 lands instead of 3 matters. In fact, letting them keep the amulet around might have even been worse for us, right? So I don't think that pile splitting ended up mattering, but, you know, if we had kept the Liliana around one more turn, but, you know, I think the ult was a winning line. We just flooded like crazy. But that is alright, that does happen. Let's go to Game 3, see if we can get him. And here we are, my friends, Game 3 against Amulet Titan. We've got a solid hand. We've got some discard, we've got a piece of removal, we've got a threat. I think we like it. I think we like it a lot. So, Blooming Marsh, Inquisition of Kozilek, seeing some interesting stuff. So they've got 4 lands, no bounce lands, but they do have some utility, and Primeval Titan. They also have Azusa Lost But Seeking and Path to Exile. So Azusa is a bit of a problem because Deathmark is sorcery speed, so we can't really play around her too well. She could go off, get a ton of value. I think we're supposed to take that. Even though we only have 1 threat in hand, getting our only threat pathed is pretty bad. We should be drawing more threats, and the first path is not that bad for us if we can ever find a second threat, right? So they play the Crossroads, and look at that, we find the second threat. Dark Confidant, beautiful, beautiful draw here. Lets us be proactive, lets us play something that they kind of have to answer, or it's going to start snowballing. So, opponent plays Talaria West, and during our upkeep, we'll Path the Bob. Sure. So, that's pretty good for them, to have an answer to the Bob at least, but we draw Liliana of the Veil. Alright. You know, that was a pretty nice draw too, I'm not gonna lie. So even though our hand is stacked, we don't necessarily want to pitch anything. We are going to indeed play the Lily and tick her up. I think that's better than playing the Tracker without a follow-up land. So, tough call here. I remember making this exact call in an earlier video against Amulet Titan where I'm deciding whether Deathmark or Maelstrom Pulse is better to pitch. I think it's a pretty 50-50 call. I think Deathmark is better for the purposes of mana efficiency, but Pulse is better for the purposes of flexibility. I think you could go either way, but I chose to I chose the safer route. I kept the safer card in hand. It should, in theory, answer whatever they have next turn, basically, if I need it to. So they pitch a Primetime. They play a Grove of the Burn Willows, and they're tapping Jeskai colors, which is kind of strange in a heavily green deck, but they tap Jeskai colors for Engineered Explosives, and my decision to keep that Maelstrom Pulse is so rewarded, because now it lets us keep our Liliana around, who is going to be key to our chances to win this game. So we'll open up on the Thoughtseize. We see a pair of Primeval Titans after they already pitched one, so that's terrifying. And that Cavern of Souls that we knew about. So, obviously take a prime time. Then we'll go ahead and deal with the EE and take up the Liliana, pitching our Scavenging Ooze, keeping our Tireless Tracker. I think that's a card I rate more highly, even in this situation with some fuel for the Skoos and with not a ton of land to follow it up. They choose to pitch their Titan and keep their Cavern. Makes sense, and they find a bounce land. So, unfortunately here, Assassin's Trophy, such a good card, but I do think we are supposed to play a creature and take the Lily up to pitch the trophy. Feels bad, but that's where we're at. And opponent is continuing to make land drops. They still have that Cavern in hand. Fulminator Mage. Wonderful draw here, because this allows us to play the Fulminator, tick the Liliana up, keeping... excuse me, they had a Talaria West in hand, not that Cavern. We get to tick our Liliana up, so now we get to keep her around after we potentially ult next turn. And we get to take care of that Simic Growth Chamber, Stone Rain, their 2-mana land, and we're clocking with a mediocre 3-2. And we're not clocking anymore because they have a Path to Exile. So sure, I think they should have waited till our turn to play that, but whatever. And right now, we're looking a little bit like it's a repeat of last game where we have a totally dominating position and we just drew a land. Very, very annoying, but here, I was like, alright, let's think about it. What could they really have that deals with our Liliana with just those lands? I don't think there's really much. So, I went ahead and ticked her up. This lets us ult next turn if we want to, while still keeping her at 2. And, you know, with a card still in hand and with us drawing a land for a turn, I just ticked her up again. It feels scary to leave her here like this, leaving the ult sitting on the table, but that is what it is. Now that they have 4 lands, we finally are going to ult, but look, we are flooding out yet again. This is an insane amount of flood. Completely insane amount of flood. So what I did with these piles is separated the Stronghold and the Fortress, because basically they're both colorless lands. They're both not accomplishing much until they start accomplishing other things, right? So I made them choose between mono white and red green for their lands, and they chose the red green, and they find a Sakura Tribe Scout. Okay. Not the most threatening, but it's pretty good for them actually to have a playable card there. And look at our ridiculous amounts of flood. I actually went ahead and just edicted here because, like, what the heck's going on? And now they're making land drops, and we're going to go ahead and thin out on the end step. We finally find a Tarmogoyf. Wonderful. Wonderful. There's a threat. There's a good threat. So we play our 5/6, we play our Swamp, we take our Lily up, and it's over back to the opponent. Opponent makes a land drop. And so do we. Yet again, we find a land. At least this time it's our good friend, the Treetop Village. It's the apes coming to the rescue. So we hit for 5. Our Lily's at 3. Okay. Opponent holds a card in hand and they're going to pass. Yet another land, guys. I don't know what's going on, but at least we're starting to hit good lands. At least these are utility lands. So we'll play it. We'll take the Lily up. And wouldn't you know it, they have their 3rd Path to Exile of the game. This is not a card I see that much in Titan at all, much less seeing all 3 against me in a game. We're punished even more for our flood by the land, by being out of basics now. But, you know, at least we still have this Lily, at least we still have a clock. Feels like we should be running away with this game, but our top deck is not complying. That said, we're still in a pretty good position. And once more, we're going to draw step Field of Ruin them, taking away their Rainbow land. And, you know, we don't get to get a land. Like I said, we're punished for that. But they get a forest, they play a scout that they drew for turn. Alright. Tarmogoyf is our draw. That's a pretty good one. We'll edict away their creature. We'll play the Goyf. We'll smash him for 3 with the apes. They are facing lethal. We've got a 5/6 and a 3/3 on board. They're at 8. And they drew a land, so that's going to do it. Quite the crazy match here against Amulet Titan, wasn't it? Like we had 3 games play out pretty differently. Games 2 and 3, you know, game 1 was kind of different in terms of the ebb and flow of the game from 2 and 3. But then we saw in 2 and 3 how number 1 we just flooded for way too long despite being in a commanding position to win the game. Here, we still flooded pretty badly, but at least we had enough live draws mixed in with the flood between Tarmogoyfs and utility lands to get us there. But man, that was a little bit hairy, and that would have felt so bad to drop that game, but we didn't. We got there, so we're back up to even. We're 1-1. We took down Amulet Titan. Good time. So let's move on to round 3. Alright, everybody. Round 3 with Golgari Midrange competitive league replay for you, and our hand's really good. In a blind game 1, really, really good. It's a little heavy on interaction with the board rather than the hand. But we're certainly going to keep it. Opponent likes their 7 as well, and they're going to start us off. Watery Grave into Thoughtseize. Looks like Grixis Shadow to me. They take away our Fatal Push. We draw another Fatal Push right off the top, so that's not bad at all. There's no need to shock that land in or to play a Blooming Marsh. That would telegraph that we had a push. Number 1 and number 2, they're unlikely to play a Shadow turn 2. Or anything else that we care about pushing. They'll Thought Scour, milling a Thought Scour and a Snapcaster Mage, and pass with Watery Grave open. So here, we don't necessarily expect him to live, but I think it is correct to play the Bob, force them to have a removal spell, and they have a Fatal Push, sure. So, opponent makes a land drop, fetches for a Blood Crypt, and they tap out for a Gurmag Angler, which is interesting because they know about our Liliana of the Veil. Not only did they not take our Lily with the discard spell, they also ran the Gurmag out into a known Lily. So that makes me think they have another follow-up threat. It makes me almost certain they do. That said, I think it's still 100% correct to play this Lily, get her in under Stubborn Denial, cleanly edict that away, and now they still have to deal with her. It's still a big problem. So I can only assume they didn't have this Angler in hand when they fired off their turn 1 discard spell. I assume they have a Shadow or 2 in hand, which is why they took the Fatal Push. They're going to shock in a Watery Grave, and they're tapping out yet again for yet another Gurmag Angler, so super interesting. Either they missequenced or they've ripped both of these Anglers sometime after turn 1. Regardless, we draw Thoughtseize, which is kind of whatever. It's okay. I think it's better to hang on to that than to hang on to the Brutality, and I think we're supposed to pitch one of the discard spells here. So we will pitch the Brutality, and we are certainly, again, with an eye towards Stubborn Denial and all that stuff, we're just going to pulse away the Angler. Very, very nice to have dealt with 2 Anglers and still have a Liliana of the Veil at 2. So they totally empty their hand, they play a land, they play a Shadow. This is wonderful for us. So we get to go ahead and push the Shadow. We know it's going to resolve. We tick up to pitching our Thoughtseize, which is now pretty much useless. And we've got a couple trophies in hand. The only thing that we're missing is a clock. But opponent's got a card in hand. Looks like they're going to pass the turn. We have an Overgrown Tomb. So this was a pretty interesting spot. You could have done one of 2 things here, right? You could have just kind of like ticked the Lily up, maybe pitched the Tomb and held all this removal and passed. Or you could say, I'm going to totally empty my hand right now and get into top deck mode, which is great for the Liliana, and maybe try to mess up their land base a little bit. Now, this is not as appealing as it would otherwise be if they had already had to fetch for a Steam Vents at some point. So, like, if they had a Blood Crypt and a Steam Vents instead of Polluted Delta, this would be very exciting to take them off of red. As it is, we can't really take them off of red, but I still went ahead and shocked this in, take jam both trophies, just hit some lands. This one is a Stone Rain because they don't have any more basics, or it would have been, but their final card in hand was Stubborn Denial. Sure, that's fine with me. Tick the Lily up. Lily at 4 is very tough for them to beat, especially when they draw a land in that situation. Now, our draw wasn't any better. It's an Inquisition, so we just tick the Lily up, lose that. Opponent's going to fetch their Steam Vents on the end step, and Snapcaster Mage would be a pretty good draw here, something that can pressure the Liliana at instant speed. They have a hardcast Street Wraith, which is actually pretty cool, but we have an awesome rip off the top of Kalitas, so we get to tap out, slam the Kalitas, edict the Street Wraith, make a zombie, and now we are in such a commanding position. The opponent takes their draw step and they scoop it up. So That was wonderful. That felt great. Felt great to take care of those anglers right on curve, and felt great to just get so much value out of the Liliana. And then the Kalitas was wonderful as a finisher and a value piece. So that was an awesome game one against Grixis Shadow. Let's go to the sideboard, though, see how we're going to kit out against them for games 2 and 3. Alright, my friends, here we are sideboarding against Shadow. So, in this matchup, I like Kitchen Finks. I like Maelstrom Pulse. We saw how good Pulse specifically was because it can hit everything. It's got 2-for-1 potential, but even 1-for-1ing an Angler is very, very good. Kitchen Finks is nice against their removal-heavy stuff and is good at clogging up the ground as well. I do like Liliana the Last Hope. Very good in these grindy matchups that put a lot of permanents into our graveyard. Can kill Snapcaster Mage cleanly, can shrink their fatties. All good. And I like bringing in all 3 Fulminator Mage here in this matchup. Definitely a big fan of that. So, yeah, their land base is so fragile. Again, it's just a good way to clog up the ground as well sometimes. The maybe card here for me is Engineered Explosives. I think it's doable. I think it's very doable, but we'll talk about what comes out first. And it's true that you also don't want too many things that can only kill the Shadows. Or I suppose the Snapcasters, but we don't really care about having things that can kill the Snappy so much. So, in terms of what comes out, you know, opinions differ on this, but I'm actually somebody who advocates, if you have enough cards to bring in, pretty much getting rid of your discard spells. So, that would be Collective Brutality is the worst one. That one should come out for sure. Inquisition is the second worst, and if you're going to leave in some discard, it should probably be Thoughtseize. Because it can take away the Angler. And our life total is not all that relevant. Like, losing 2 life for Thoughtseize is not that big a deal because they're usually chunking us for 5 or more per hit once they start swinging. So, if you're going to leave in some discard, I think it should be Thoughtseize. That said, I take it all out. I take it all out. I treat this like a mid-range matchup, and therefore we don't want discard. We want threats, and we want answers. So, from here, let's see where are my numbers at. We're at 59, so you could just call it good, go ahead and bring in this Engineered Explosives, and I think that's fairly doable, but I actually forgot an important piece of the puzzle here. We do want these Nile Spellbombs. I missed that when I first glanced over at the sideboard. Spellbombs are wonderful. They are good against Gurmag Angler, they are good against Snapcaster Mage, and they replace themselves, which is important in this attrition matchup, for sure. So from here you can make a couple cuts. If you are on the draw specifically, it's kind of cute to cut a land, again, considering it like a mid-range matchup, and I think I'd cut Forest here because they don't tax our basics at all. I'd rather cut Forest than Blooming Marsh in a matchup like this. We want our best mana early on. So cutting Forest is fine, you can submit this 60. You could also cut a Fatal Push here. Again, we don't want too many things that kill only Shadow. It would be either Decay or Push, and I think I'd rather have the Uncounterable. I'd pay 1 more for the Uncounterable way to kill a Shadow with Decay. So that's totally fine. So these 3 are our maybe board cards. Basically, you want to cut one of them. Maybe we can go ahead, or excuse me, you want to leave one of them in. So we want to cut the Forest on the draw. If we're back on the play, maybe bring the Forest in and cut both of these. I think it's pretty 50-50 what you want between Push and EE. There are pros and cons to both, so let me know what you think about that. I think for this particular match, I did play with the EE. So this is how it's going to look like on the draw, and let's go to Game 2. Alright, my friends, Game 2 against Grixis Shadow, and our hand is pretty sweet. We have a couple different ways to kill a Shadow. We're pretty soft to an early Angler, so we're going to try to fade the early Angler. We don't really have any way to stop it, though. We don't have Spellbomb, we don't have Discard. Obviously, we took out our Discard. We don't have removal that hits it, but I still think this hand is a certain keep. We don't like to mulligan against Shadow. They're leaving in their discard effects to a somewhat significant degree. They might take out some, but there's still going to be a pretty high amount of them. So mulling is bad. When you've got a functional hand, you just keep it, in my opinion. Fulminator Mage, potentially decent, but right now we cannot cast him. And, you know, Not necessarily going to win you the game single-handedly on the draw most times, but still looks like a potentially decent one. We're going to go ahead and get that EE in under all kinds of effects. You know, they might have some kind of artifact destruction. I'm not sure how likely that is. Not a great likelihood in my opinion, but we do want to think about Kolagin's command specifically, because if they've got that, that's going to come in against us, and that is something that we don't want to give them a really good 2-for-1 opportunity on. So Tarmogoyf is an interesting draw, but for fear of sideboarded Lilianas of the Veil, for fear of Kolagin's command, or just suspicion of removal in general, I actually went ahead and passed. We're holding up EE, we're holding up push. If they don't do anything, that's totally fine. And they don't do anything, they don't make a land drop. Totally fine with me. Pretty happy to play Drago here, another Tarmogoyf. So now you might think that, well, we have enough creatures, we can start playing them out. I still don't think so. I think what we want to do here is play our Field of Ruin and pass. Because what we can do here is hold up all of our stuff, and then on the end step, if they still don't do anything, or indeed the draw step, that's right, I draw stepped this, just in case. So we went ahead and draw stepped, hit the Blood Crypt. This is going to give us a Revolt for Fatal Push, in case we need that this turn. They bolt us in response, so they're using their red mana, and we take them off of red. Very good. So they still haven't made another land drop, they're off of red. We find a Blooming Marsh, so it is a little bit safer to start playing out our stuff, but I would rather just play out our Fulminator and Stone Rain them. Set them down to 1 land, take them off of blue. Seems really good. They're going to flash in a Snapcaster Mage, much like bolting us in response, just to play the card, get some value out of it. So we'll play our Blooming Marsh, we'll get hit for 2, and they're still on just 1 swamp. Totally fine with me. And here you could do a couple different things. You could play double creature, but I chose to get our Liliana of the Veil down under counter magic and to edict away a Snapcaster. We are just going to be really patient with this game. We're just going to make sure we get maximum value. It's okay to take her down. You know, she's not vulnerable to anything right now. They can't make a play. They have to discard to hand size, and they pitch a Shadow. So that's pretty great for us, even though we have answers to it. Still pretty great. Maelstrom Pulse is a fine draw, and I'm going to pitch the push, because they're ditching their shadows. We have EE. Pitching push seems correct there. And they pitch a Stubborn Denial. So now it's time to actually play out our threats. We're just going to go double Goyf. They've got Fatal Push for the first one, sure. They've got Inquisition. They take away our Pulse, but they still don't have another land drop. So, Blooming Marsh, fine. Fine draw. And that makes us go Tracker into land. And this is a little suboptimal because we can't quite empty our hand. If that had been an untapped land, we could play the Skoos. That would have been amazing. But still, getting to make a clue, getting to deploy another threat, getting to take the Lily up to 3, getting another Shadow out of their hand, crashing in for 4 of the Goyf, all of this is amazing. Opponent goes to their draw step and they just scoop it up. So they got stuck on 2 lands in our line of being really patient with our creatures, hitting their Blood Crypt with the Field of Ruin, and then fixing our own mana with that so we could play our Fulminator Mage the following turn. That's what won us the game. Obviously, Liliana was amazing there, gave us inevitability. We had some other good stuff going on, the Tarmogoyf Clock. All of that's very good, but the attacking the land base is what won us the game there. And I think being patient with our creatures early on. So that one felt great. A very dominating performance. 2-0 against Shadow. And remember, guys, every month for my patrons, Patreon exclusive content, I am writing a scouting report on a top tier deck in Modern that my patrons get to, at the Confidant tier or above, get to vote on what I write about. Last month, I guess this month, the beginning of this month, I wrote about this deck that we just destroyed. I wrote about Shadow. So if you want to support this channel, and if you want to get down on those scouting reports, you know what to do. Grimflayer MTG is on Patreon, so I would appreciate any support anyone out there wants to lend. I would just love it. So thought I'd mention that on the heels of our great victory here against Shadow, and we advanced to 2-1. So good times, and I will see you for round 4. Alright, my friends, round 4 in our competitive league, and we're on the play with a a quite solid hand for a blind game one. It does indeed have a little bit of everything. Our opponent will mull down to 6, and they're going to keep, so Swamp Inquisition is the play here. And wouldn't you know it, it is Dredge. Oh, this makes my nice, well-rounded hand so much worse. I really dislike this deck because it's such an outlier in the format. It makes discard and spot removal so sketchy. And, you know, these game ones where you just have to keep a land with hands and spells, you just like, oh, it's Dredge, I'm probably just gonna lose. So, very feel-bad moment to see this. But at least it's not Living End, right? At least it's not Living End, so we've got a problem here. When you first glance at the hand, it's like, what's the problem? You take away their way to get cards in the graveyard, and it's not really doing anything else from there. Here's the problem. We have to play a creature. Turn 2 Tarmogoyf is like our best creature, besides maybe turn 2 Scavenging Ooze. They have a main deck Dark Blast. This is a way for them to get Dredge effects into the graveyard just because we play a creature. But in my opinion, much like against Living End, we cannot afford to just not play a creature because it might turn on Demonic Dread or Dark Blast, respectively. I think we're just going to have to plan to play our Tarmogoyf unless we rip like a Nile Spellbomb or something, and then who knows. But if we don't rip any of our Grave Hate, we're probably just going to have to try to race them. And regardless of what we're going to do, though, taking away the Shriekhorn is still the correct play there. Definitely happy with that. So we draw Liliana of the Veil. This would be shaping up so well against most decks, but because it's Dredge, we've got a lot of bad cards in hand. And yeah, you know, we're going to give them the Dark Blast target here, but I think the turn 2 Tarmogoyf is definitely better than just playing Draw-Go with a Dredge deck. Like, this main deck Dark Blast, excuse me, main deck Dark Blast is just very unfortunate, especially in that opening hand. But they get to Dredge 3, they turn over a couple more Dredge cards. Oh man, if they had just blanked for that one Dredge, we might have been in some pretty good shape. But as things are, they get to go off next turn with the Dredge 5, and there is nothing we can do about it. However, we are putting them under pressure. We hit for 4, and we get to play a Tireless Tracker here, which is not the best in the matchup, but certainly a follow-up threat is way better than anything else we're doing. So they Dredge 5, they find a Narcomoeba and some Faithless Lootings. Not the worst I've ever seen, but they're going to flash back a Looting, and here comes a Creeping Chill. Creeping Chill. This card is dumb. This card is very dumb. It's going to drain us for 3. It's going to go a long way towards stabilizing them. Land there was a pretty good draw, to be honest. It's going to advance our clock and let us dig and develop our mana all at once. So Fatal Push is our draw, and we are pretty interested in just pushing that Narcomoeba. At least that's one card that stays dead, and it lets us get in for 9. So they're actually facing lethal on board. Granted, they can hardcast Narcomoeba maybe if they make blue, but we've got a bunch of removal in hand, so I'm actually feeling pretty good at this point, barring their Dredge. And they're going to go ahead and Dredge, and they hit yet another Creeping Chill and yet another Narcomoeba. So all of this free stuff is just killing us. The free chump blockers, the free Drain 3. They've got a Faithless Looting. They get yet another Creeping Chill. So they've gotten 3 free Lightning Helixes on us here at turn 4 in the context of a mediocre start. And now they're going to cast a Golgari Thug. Alright, so this is stuff that we could beat, again, besides the fact that they have gained 9 life. That's pretty hard to beat when we're trying to race. So we make a land drop in here. So, like, we can... Playing the Liliana is mana efficient, whatever. We don't want to be mana efficient. We have to try to somehow kill them, like, this turn if possible. So cracking the Clue is the first start to that. And maybe there was some world in which that helped us do so, or at least that found us like a Nile Spellbomb. But we're finding more Planeswalkers. Not the greatest. We're going to go ahead and push and attack. We could trophy there as well, but I think we save our trophy for whatever they're going to do next turn. I believe they have a Stinkweed Imp in hand, so that's a better trophy target than the Thug. But they get yet another free chump blocker. They've got these Amalgams, which are not that big a deal because they come in tapped. Life from the Loam. Getting back a couple Bloodghasts. And here's the other reason we didn't trophy them away, is because we knew that the Bloodghasts were likely to come back, and we needed to have trophy up to try to stay alive. But here's the problem, is they've got a Conflagrate in the yard as well. So as long as they see the line, we are dead. They've got exactly lethal. Very, very unfortunate. So we trophy away a Bloodghast, we take 2, and they have exactly 5 cards in hand to do exactly the 5 remaining damage to us. So pretty unlucky on multiple fronts to actually lose this game 1 to Dredge, because A, we didn't find any of our main deck Grave Hate, B, they had that main deck Dark Blast in the opener, which is really what got them going. If they had just taken 1 turn to find that, we would probably have won. And then we drew a bunch of removal, which ended up being okay in the context of racing them, you know, keeping the board clear and all that, but still not very good draws compared to a lot of the other things we had. Our Planeswalkers are not very good at all, and of course they hit 3 Creeping Chills as well. So very, very close game. Just like with Living End, we almost won a nearly unwinnable game 1. This was very, very, very close. They were dead next turn if they didn't have lethal here, because the Bloodghast can't block. We have a couple different ways to kill the Liliana, and we would have just swung for lethal. So quite unfortunate, but you're not really supposed to win game 1s against Dredge, but it's really nice when you do, because just like with Living End, if you've got the ability to only have to win 1 of 2 post-side games, you're in decent shape. Definitely more decent shape with Dredge than with Living End, by the way. But if you don't, then you're really on the ropes. Your deck gets way better post-side, but you're still on the ropes. But anyway, let's go to game 2. Let's go to the sideboard first. We'll do that quick. Okay, my friends, sideboarding against Dredge, you've seen me do this before. Liliana of the Veil is our worst card. All 4 of her come out. These 2-mana removal spells are also quite bad. Trophy is worse than Decay, but they can both pretty clearly come out as far as I'm concerned. From there, you know, stuff like Liliana the Last Hope, a Tireless Tracker, the stuff isn't great, but we'll see what we have to bring in. Bringing in all of the Grave Hate, we've got 2 Nile Spellbombs, a Grafdigger's Cage, and a Surgical Extraction for starters. From there, we want stuff that's a little less impactful, but still decent. Collective Brutality, especially on the play, is good to take away looting if they're on a low land hand, or Cathartic Reunion. And, of course, just draining them for 2 is not the worst. It can take away, like, a sideboarded Assassin's Trophy. Brutality is better than some alternatives, let's just put it that way. Still not great, but decent. Then, from there, I don't really know if we have much else. I've debated the Languish on here before, and this game I actually think I did bring it in. But let's put it in the maybe board. I'm not really convinced we do want the Languish, but I think I brought it in this time just to try something a little different with some of our very bad last couple slots. Maelstrom Pulse also falls in this category, in my opinion. It's probably better than some other forms of removal, but it's not good. It's not good. So, if we already brought out all of the bad cards, we bring in all of that stuff, we've still got another spot. We've still got another spot if we play all of those cards. So, I think Engineered Explosives just doesn't hit enough. So Kitchen Finks and Liliana the Last Hope are both considerations here. Neither of them are very spectacular, but so I guess you're looking at 5 of these 6 maybe board cards. Let's leave our tracker in even though it's slow, and let's say 4 of these 5 cards are what you want. Maybe we just only play with 1 Last Hope and call it good. Pretend that Kitchen Finks and Languish are good cards in the matchup, but mainly the Grave Hate comes in, the Lilies come out, that's the most important thing, and the 2-mana removal. 2-mana single target spot removal also comes out. So that's how we look against Dredge. Let's go to game 2. Alright, my friends, here we are, game 2 against Dredge with a very questionable hand. I thought about this one for a while. I thought about this one carefully, and I did decide to keep it. The obvious risk is that we never hit a second land, but if we do hit a second land, we might potentially be in business. Collective Brutality has good windows of use, and again, that turn 2 Tarmogoyf on the play last game almost got us there, and that was without Grave Hate back up. Now, this is the main reason to keep the hand. We do have Surgical Extraction. That said, there are some risks. Double Tracker is just terrible in general in this matchup, especially on a one-lander. So this is certainly a sketchy keep, but I did choose to keep it. I've just been playing Dredge and seeing no Grave Hate lately, so maybe that influenced my decision, but I was like, I've got some Grave Hate, I'm going to keep it. That said, we need to hit our third and fourth lands, really, but the second land is a start. They go turn 1 Faithless Looting, that sucks for us. And they have Life from the Loam, Prized Amalgam, Looting. We draw Kitchen Finks, so we're off to a horrible start. We got punished for our questionable keep, and they had turn 1 start filling up the graveyard, and they have a Dredge effect, a creature that comes back, and a flashback card. So they have a little bit of everything. And people talk about how much better Surgical Extraction is than Nile Spellbomb. I still believe in a split. And if we had played a turn 1 Spellbomb there, at least we could cleanly Spellbomb this turn, empty out all 3 of those cards, get a redraw crack at a second land. So you can see where the Spellbomb can be better, even against fully dedicated graveyard decks like this. So, you know, we could also have just extracted the Life from the Loam. That didn't seem right to me, but they Dredge, they hit a bunch of value. They hit another Dredger, they hit 2 Narcomoebas, so we're kind of punished for that decision, but I still think it might be correct here to just take away the Prized Amalgams. That's a big part of how they beat us is with those Amalgams, so sure. We get to take away their Amalgams, we get to see a hand of a bunch of lands, a Creeping Chill, a Nature's Claim, and a Life from the Loam. So, you know, I take that back. Maybe if this was in their opener, turn 1 Spellbomb just gets Nature's Claimed, right? We at least don't get the value out of it, the draw value. We just have to crack it in response. So, whatever. The fact that we missed our second land is pretty much close enough to a death sentence, but we will look at what they did. We see a couple Lightning Axes that are probably out of the side. Assassin's Trophies are definitely out of the side. Anything else worth noting? Not really. Looks like that's basically the extent of their sideboarding besides these Nature's Claims as well. So for whatever good that'll do us, we get to do that, but we're dealing with a couple Narcomoebas. They've got some more Dredge effects in the graveyard. We are in trouble. They buy back a land with Life from the Loam. Alright, there's our second land. It's a bad one, though. It's colorless. That could bite us with Kitchen Finks. It could bite us with a future Skoos. But at least it's a second land that came in untapped, right? So they're going to loot. They loot away some more Dredge effects. And they're getting aggro. They're not respecting the Goyf. They're chumping. They're not sitting back to chump. They attack for 2. We draw Kalitas, way too clunky here, and yeah, it's Collective Brutality time. We've just gotta try to erase them, basically. So we erase them in 2 ways: by killing a 1/1 and draining them for 2, pitching a Tireless Tracker. Not the most exciting play, but that's where we're at with our hand. And they're just going off now. They found Bloodghast, they found Creeping Chill, they found Stinkweed Imp off of this Dredge. We are just getting buried. So they get a Bloodghast back, and they conflagrate us. Massive conflagrate to the face, which gives the Bloodghast haste, puts us all the way down to 5. We find a Scavenging Ooze, a little late for that, especially with only 1 green mana, so we've got to go on defense, but we are pretty dead, right? We're pretty dead. Life from the Loam, they're going crazy with value. And what do they have here for us? Well, I think the replay just shorted out there, but I might have been just another Conflagrate. Either way, I believe we got killed that turn or the next turn. I don't quite remember. The replay cuts us off short. Doesn't matter. We were just dead. we're not even going to stabilize against just their board. We're not even going to stabilize at this point, really, against the Narcomoebas and the Bloodghast, much less the other stuff they had. So, a high-risk, high-reward hand did not pay off for us. Feels bad. Feels bad to have been, like with Living End, so close yet so far in Game 1, and then just kind of got rocked Game 2 when it should get better. So, in hindsight, I should have mulliganed that hand. But, you know, surgical extraction backing up turn 2 Tarmogoyf, I think, was potentially enough incentive to keep. That said, we do have a fairly high density of Grave Hate in the deck post-side, so perhaps I should have mulled. Either way, taking 3 games off of Dredge is tough. This is one of our tougher matchups, and unfortunately, we ran into 2 of the roughest graveyard decks for us out there, and those have been our 2 losses so far. We fall to 2-2, and but that's all good. We're still playing for the positive record in round 5, so I will see you there. Okay, everybody, here we are for the 5th and final round in this competitive league. We're on the draw with a pretty good hand, honestly. Lots of utility out of our land base. We can cast everything, a couple discard spells, and a Dark Confidant. Like, you know, this does hinge a little bit heavily on the Bob, but I think it's certainly a nice keep in a blind Game 1. The opponent takes a mull to 6. We are seeing our opponents mull a fair amount, to be fair. I think in a recent league I played literally all 5 matches. I don't believe there is a single mulligan, so it's good to see our opponents are mortal this time with some normal hands that sometimes need to be thrown back. So, anyway, Swamp is not an exciting draw, but we will play it, and we will Inquisition, and we see Snapcaster Mage and Cryptic Command, and Polluted Delta. That's all normal off of a Creeping Tar Pit. Turn 1 Creeping Tar Pit leads us to expect things like this. Here's the thing that I didn't expect. We've got Misty Rainforest, which, okay, could just be a fetch, but now they have a breeding pool, so this is pretty clearly a Sultai deck of some kind. So we've seen people try Sultai control in the past. It's looking like some kind of a Sultai control deck. Obviously, we take the only legal take. Snapcaster Mage, and we pass it back. Opponent goes Polluted Delta and pass. So we draw an Inquisition. That's a decent draw, but I think what we want to do here is just jam the Bob. We could lead on our Thoughtseize and take the Cryptic Command if there's no better take. Then we could play the Hissing Quagmire. That's the other line, but unless they ripped removal or counter magic off the exact top deck, we're going to be rewarded for playing this Bob. But it looks like they did. They ripped a counter spell. At least it's not a hard counter, so they remand our Bob. Pretty unfortunate for us, right? Pretty unfortunate, but they go Search for Azcanta, into Misty, and pass. So now that we're on 3 mana, I will lead on the discard spell to clear the way for our Bob. And we see Wilderness Reclamation, so I'm just pointing out, my friends, their draws have been amazing. The Remand was amazing there, the Search for Azcanta for turn was incredible, this card's so good against us. And now they have Wilderness Reclamation. This is some new tech from Ravnica Allegiance. At the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. Obviously, this is amazing in a control deck. It's amazing with Azcanta the Sunken Ruin. But right now, here's my thinking. I can deal with Search for Azcanta with either Maelstrom Pulse or Field of Ruin once it flips. I can also deal with this Wilderness Reclamation with my Maelstrom Pulse as well. So I think for that reason, the better take is still Cryptic Command, but Wilderness Reclamation is clearly kind of a build-around card, right? You don't play a card like that unless it's a center piece of your deck. So we get to we take the Cryptic, and I do think that was correct, but worth considering our other options there. Search immediately, binning a land they don't need, great value. They shock in the breeding pool, and they tap out for the Wilderness Reclamation. So the good news is our Bob sticks around. Revealing a Tireless Tracker, getting a little painful over here at 13 life, but that's alright. We're going to attack with the Bob, test the waters a bit. And they don't do anything there, so sure, fine with me. Let's try the Tireless Tracker and see what the opponent has. Mystical Teachings in response. So they're going to tap out for a Teachings, finding Abrupt Decay. So this actually lines up pretty well for us because we get to, you know, if our opponent had held that till our end step, we would maybe have considered playing the Hissing Quagmire there, but because they don't, and we know they're tapped out with a Decay in hand, we for sure will fetch a land and Inquisition away the Decay. And even though we want to leave our basics in against control, our life total is getting low enough. We have a Bob around that I think we just get the basic there. They bin another land with Search. They transform. That's very good for them. And they main phase a Search, in as Kanta activation rather, they find a Mystical Teaching. So we've run them out of resources really well, but now they've got their little combo online where they get to draw and then untap. It's very, very good for them. So a little bit rough here, a little bit sketchy. And so still on the end step, this is very cool. They get to untap Wilderness Reclamation, then they receive priority again on the end step. They get to activate as Kanta. They find an opt. Sure. So we're drawing a ton of cards too. We draw double Liliana of the Veil. Well, that's an interesting one, but I think we just want to take care of this Wilderness Reclamation and stop their insane value. So that resolves. That's very good, but the rest of our turn's pretty clunky. We can't do anything else, not even hold up a clue. All we can do is make a clue and try to attack. They're going to opt. And hey, we get in for 5. We've got all the card advantage in the world now. We've got all the card advantage in the world. They find a Field of Ruin, and they're going to field our field, which is fair enough, I suppose. But it's a little bit, potentially a little bit loose, I guess, because that lets us have something to do with our turn. We get to crack a clue. I understand why they did it to protect their Ascanta the Sunken Ruin, but lets us get a little bit of velocity going, a little bit of efficiency. So cracking the clue, finding a land. Sure, that's not bad. But it's getting a little bit painful. We take another 2 from the Tarmogoyf. We're down to 7. We're at a virtual 6 with this fetch land. And remember, they have a Creeping Tar Pit. It's a 3/2 unblockable. So we have to be careful here. But we're going to move to attacks, and they allow us to move to attacks. So this is an interesting decision point. I'm going to crack a clue. They don't do anything. And at this point, you know, if they've already bypassed blocks, they can't block. They probably have something, but I think I'm still supposed to make them have that something rather than just letting them go to 1. So we will crack another clue, see what they've got, and it's a Cryptic Command to bounce our tracker. So they could have played that a couple different ways, but that ended up being pretty good discipline from our opponent. They bounced the tracker, so we invested a bunch of mana in something that gets bounced, and we pretty much have to fetch here, go to 6, and make a proactive play. With only 2 mana, I don't think it's correct to hold up clue and push there. I think it's better to play the Tarmogoyf. So we'll see what happens. We are at a scary low life total, especially again with that Creeping Tar Pit around. Opponent's gonna Mystical Teachings and tutor up a Pulse of Marasa. Very spicy. Return target creature or land from a graveyard to its owner's hand, gain 6 life. Seems pretty good. I'm not necessarily sure they should be main phasing this stuff, but I mean, it's amazing value. They get 6 life, they're very stabilized with the life total now compared to how they were, and they buy back a Snapcaster Mage. So, Snapcaster plus 1 unknown in hand. And we, thankfully, finally hit a painless hit off our Bob, which is Swamp. So we're going to play the Swamp, and we're going to lead on a Liliana of the Veil. We don't need any more card advantage, so there was no real incentive to go tracker into land there. That's just too clunky for this turn. We need to do better things this turn. We need to run them out of resources a little more aggressively. So, in fact, Liliana ticking up will pitch a tracker, and they pitch a Remand. Okay, so they just have that Snapcaster in hand. For that reason, and for the reasons of our life total and just developing a wide board, we want to play Skoos here. Skoos is going to blank their Snapcaster as long as we are disciplined with it, and we get to undo the life gain of Pulse of Marasa, basically, is what our attack does this turn, and then a little extra as they fetch and as our Tarmogoyf is, and Bob Tandem is 1 more damage than the life they gained. So they're down to 4. They're dead to any 2 things connecting, including a Hissing Quagmire if we so desire. Not sure what the replay is doing here, but sure, let's go to the next turn. Yeah, so the replay ends it a little bit shortly, but basically they main phased their Snapcaster Mage, they targeted a spell, we ate it in a response with Skoos. I think then they dug with Iskanta and then scooped. They didn't have anything else, so they were basically dead. They had to either roll the dice with an Iskanta activation, or they had to hope that we missed the line with our Skoos in response to their Snapcaster, but we didn't miss it. We had them, Oh, okay, no, here's what happened. I remember now. I don't know why the replay finishes a turn short sometimes, but anyway, I think they went for the Snapcaster, we blew them out with the Ooze, and then they went for the Creeping Tar Pit attack, which is the right play, because that leaves us likely, at least somewhat likely, to be dead to our own Bob, but we pushed the Tar Pit, and that was GG. That's right. So, anyway, no matter how we got there, you saw everything but the final turn here, and we did indeed get there against Sultai Wilderness Reclamation Control. So, very spicy deck. We interacted really well in the early turns. They had some really good draws in those first few turns. Search into Remand, into Search for Iskanta, into the Wilderness Reclamation. They had some really good stuff, but so did we. Dark Confidant did a ton of work, a little sketchy with our life total, especially considering we're against a control deck, but did a ton of work, and we got there with all the advantage still in hand that you could ever ask for. So, how do we sideboard against this deck? Well, let's find out. Alright, my friends, how do we sideboard against Sultai Wilderness Reclamation? Well, you know, these decks have only been around for a week or two by now. So this will not be necessarily something that's set in stone. We don't know how these lists are going to turn out. There's a lot of variance right now, and that was my first time ever facing one as well. So take all this with a minor grain of salt, but here's what I did. So we treated it mostly like a normal control matchup. We want the Fulminator Mages, we want the Nissa Vital Force, we want the Liliana the Last Hope. She's good in a lot of control matches, less so against blue-white, but very good in terms of all of her modes being good against a Snapcaster deck that's heavy on the black. They put a lot of stuff into our yard we can buy back. She does have some decent targets to kill with her +1, and of course she is a win condition as well. So we like that. Collective Brutality is probably something we want. Maelstrom Pulses sometimes, sometimes against control you only want the main deck one, sometimes you want two. Here I think we definitely want two. They showed us the Wilderness Reclamation, the Search for Iskanta, who knows what else. I went ahead and brought this one in. Nile Spellbombs are also worth considering, and maybe, just maybe, Kitchen Finks is a potential 2-for-1, but I'm a little less high on the Finks. Still, these are the cards we want to consider, and let's go ahead and plan to bring in these 7, and then see what we don't like. Yeah, I think Fatal Push gets cut all the way. Same with Abrupt Decay. Again, they showed us that Search for Iskanta, but you can't leave Decay in only for Search, in my opinion. So, it's a control matchup. We can cut a land. It should be Blooming Marsh. We'll leave basics around. What else? So, I think, Scavenging Ooze is fine, interacting with their graveyard being a threat, but it can be clunky in multiples. It can die to a lot of their things, too. So, I would rather play, I think, against a Snapcaster deck and a Search for Iskanta deck, a 2-2 Spellbomb Skoos split rather than being too heavy on one or the other. So I'll swap out a Skoos for a Spellbomb, and then I think we can leave the third Spellbomb and the Finks off to the side, even though they're considerations, and then we just basically need to make one other cut. And to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what the best cut against this specific Sultai Wilderness deck is. I really don't know. Maybe Kalitas. Maybe it's just Kalitas is a bit too clunky of a threat, so we'll just go down on the Kalitas and call it good. I believe that's what I did here, but I could be wrong. But I think something like that is a perfectly reasonable setup against these Wilderness Reclamation decks, and that's what it's going to look like, sorted by CMC. So let me know what you all think about that as always, and let's go to Game 2. Alright, my friends, Game 2, playing to go positive, and we're against Sultai Wilderness Reclamation. We've won Game 1, we're on the draw, and our hand's sweet. No hand disruption is no bueno, but we've got a nice curve. We've got we've got some utility out of the land base. We've got a turn 2 play, turn 3 Fulminator. We've got the big bomb Nissa in hand. This is worth a keep, for sure. Opponent's going to lead on the swamp and pass. Leading on a swamp when I don't have a turn 1 creature that they can Fatal Push makes me think that they might be a little bit... Their lands might be a little bit wonky. So they play a Creeping Tar Pit. Maybe they just drew it. Maybe the read is wrong. Maybe they sequenced wrong. Who knows? For all of these reasons, you know, I'm just going to play a Tarmogoyf here. And, yep, sure enough, they do have the Fatal Push. All right, you know, trading 1 for 1, not the end of the world. And they make a land drop and pass. So my read of their wonky lands has either been alleviated by their top deck or was just not the right lead. Playing Fulminator is tempting here, but I don't want to get the Fulminator countered. So I shocked in and then Inquisitioned. Shocking in first plays around Spell Pierce. So that's why I did that. And our Inquisition, I hate when it lags and you click again and then you go through it. But that's alright, we've got this over here. So we see a really interesting hand. We see Double Growth Spiral, which is a spicy new card, potentially really good, but not so good when they don't have any green mana, right? We also see two different cards that require triple blue, so this is a very ambitious deck with regard to its mana base. Makes me happy that I have Fulminator and Field of Ruin potentially seeing action in the next couple turns. So, for the reasons of none of these cards being castable, but also for the reason of this arguably being the best take anyway, Devour Flesh that is, I took Devour Flesh and I'm going to play the Skoos. Devour Flesh is an edict effect, basically. That they can, I guess, also edict themselves in a pitch. They do play a little life game with Pulse of Marasa. Wow. Pulse of Marasa. Maybe they can devour their own flesh as well, who knows. They immediately rip an untapped green land off the top, so we're pretty punished, but hey, it happens. They Growth Spiral, they don't hit another land at least, and then they'll pass. So we will play a forest, and we play a forest first in case of any shenanigans. We want to be able to use that forest to activate our Skoo so we can still cast our Fulminator in the second main for double black. So that's why we led with the forest before our attacks. Our Fulminator resolves, and I think it's correct to immediately Stone Rain the Tar Pit there. Again, given how clunky their mana costs are. I'm very happy to just Stone Rain the Fulminator and hope for the best. They immediately rip another land, so we're getting a little bit punished for our decisions in some ways, but that's alright. So here, unless they drew exactly Snapcaster off of their Growth Spiral, we know they didn't draw the land off of for the turn. Excuse me. Sorry, it's been a long video. I'm jumbling my words. We know that they drew the land for turn this turn, right? Because if they drew it off the Growth Spiral, they would have put it into play off of the Spiral's effect. So we know they drew a land for turn. And so I chose to end step activate the Skoos. The only way we're punished for this is if they drew Snapcaster off of the Growth Spiral last turn and haven't used it yet. And as it turns out, that's exactly what happens. So we are getting punished left, right, and center for what I think are some correct decisions here, statistically. But, you know, I'm not hating. I'm just pointing it out. And you know what? You know what we're not punished for, though, is keeping this hand with Nissa. Because we're just drawing lands and we just get to go ahead and slam a Nissa here. Tapping out for the Nissa, we know it's safe. We know it's powerful, and the opponent's just going to fetch in response because they don't have anything to do. And we get to start clocking them for 5. So, opponent has an interesting decision whether or not to block there. I think not blocking is fine for 1 turn, but they might have to start thinking about the block. They cast a Growth Spiral, they get to put a land in for free, basically. And they're coming across with a Snapcaster, but they're coming across at us. They're coming across at us, so they don't respect the threshold, the alt threshold of Nissa. So, very interesting decision, but we're going to lead on the Dark Confidant, make sure he resolves. He does. I actually considered alting the Nissa then and there, but I think we're going to try to keep her around, pressure them really well, and part of the reason we're doing this is because before they get their Cryptic command mana online, we can go wide this turn with 2 attackers. So that's why I sequenced the way I did, but you could argue for just alting the Nissa there. I think that would actually have been viable with a fetch land to follow it up. However, we went for the attack and they have Fatal Push. Sure, you know, that's a pretty good answer for them, but even that doesn't feel bad to me. They had to spend a spell on a land, and we've got a ton of lands, so that's alright. We've got a Bob, and they just pass, so our Bob gets to start getting us value. That's another reason I didn't alt the Nissa right then and there, is because we had another source of card advantage. Now, we've got another interesting decision. Do we animate the land and go for the attack? The problem with doing that now is we know they have Cryptic Command, we know they're just going to Cryptic us, so even though we have more card advantage than we probably need, I actually still chose to Emblem the Nissa, because this is super efficient card advantage, especially because we drew yet another fetch land for a turn. So that feels pretty good. We're going to lead on the tracker because we don't really care if they counter it or not, to be honest. Like, this is just good if it resolves, good if it gets countered, basically. Good if it trades with the Cryptic command. So, yep, they Cryptic, they counter draw. That's all good. We get to get 2 draws off of this fetch land, and our Nissa is still around. We're going to go get a basic just in case we find anything we want to play. We're rewarded for that. We play the Ooze. Now, that was a minor sequencing error. I chose to get in with the Bob. We've got all the advantage we ever need with this Nissa emblem going on, and with our Nissa still on board, and with Skoos, blah, blah, blah. So I actually decided to get aggressive with the Bob here. Because I was going to do that, I should have waited to play my Ooze just to give them less information. But I didn't, and it's fine. They're going to shock in a Breeding Pool and pass. To me, that means probably they have Snapcaster into Cryptic Command. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that, because they could just be making their Green Sun Zenith a little bit better, but I assume they have Snap Cryptic, right? That's my assumption. That's my read. So, because of that, I chose not to activate the Ooze. It's a lot more dangerous to activate it than it was earlier in the game. Thoughtseize is an interesting draw. So what we're going to do here is be mana efficient. We're going to tap for black, then we make that into a land, then we get our emblem value, then we'll cast the Thoughtseize. So this is going to force the opponent to... Yep, sure enough, our read was correct. They have Snapcaster Mage. I mean, Snap Cryptic was live. They target push. I guess so the Cryptic is more likely to stay around in the yard. So sure, we'll eat the push. And then they just have that Cryptic out. They have the Blue Sun Zenith that we knew about in hand. I think this Cryptic is in the graveyard. So, Blue Sun Zenith for 1. Yeah, they sure get to draw 1 and shuffle that back in. Our Thoughtseize resolves and we see Trophy and Mage, so they're actually just dead, because we have exactly lethal on board, we have the Trophy to kill the Snapcaster Mage that's blocking, and they have no... they can't do anything that punishes us with the 1 mana they get to go fetch. So, Skoos and Swamp getting in for, I guess, a little bit more than exactly lethal, right? Because the Skoos could grow, but we didn't even need it. We had exactly lethal, the stylish kill with the 5/5 Swamp, and just the 2/2 Ooze. No need to get gluttonous with the Ooze. We just crack in with a Grizzly Bear, call it a game. So, pretty cool way to finish up the league against a new deck, and getting a nice 2-0 there that I think we piloted fairly tightly. The opponent had some decent draws both games, some stuff that really at the time when they drew it I was like, whoa, I don't know if, that was a good draw. I don't know if we're really going to be able to overcome that, but here in Game 2, Nissa Vital Force really taking it home, really pulling her weight, and we had just the right balance of decent threats. Bob Uzis are decent threats, coupled with land drops to really maximize the value there, and while continuing to put pressure. So, good game, well played to both this opponent and to every other opponent we faced in the league. We finished 3-2, guys. 5 straight leagues. I'm showing you every single league I play. I'm not discarding the bad ones and showing you the good ones. I don't have time for that. My life is way too busy. If I play a league, I'm gonna record it, either live or in a replay form, and upload it for you, because I don't have much more time right now to play extraneous leagues. So, 5 competitive leagues with Dark Confidant decks, 5 positive finishes. They've been a little bit more barely positive lately. We've had 3 3-2s, following up on the heels of our 5-0 and our 4-1. But hey, we are still positive. We're still finishing above 50-50 every league. We're still cashing every league. Feels very good against the cream of the crop here in the competitive leagues. So we just got by 2 graveyard decks. We got by Living End, which is our literal worst matchup, and we got by Dredge, where we kind of came close game 1, but we're not really favored at all to win game 1, and then game 2, the risky keep, and we got punished. But winning games 2 and 3 against Dredge, not exactly an easy task anyway, no matter what your hands are, short of having just all of your sideboard cards. So, yeah, 2 matchups we're not really supposed to win. This Wilderness Reclamation deck, who knows how favored we are. Amulet Titan, not an easy one. And Grixis Shadow, we are favored there, in my opinion. But it is the number 2 deck in the meta right now, last time I checked. So, another spread of some deeply unfavorable matches, some solidly unfavorable matches, and some good all-around decks, well piloted by the opponents, and we come out positive. We come out positive for 5 comp leagues running. So feels good, guys, feels good. We want another 5-0, and we're going to get there. We're going to get published again. It's going to be great, especially once I have a little bit more time to play a bit more frequently. But until then, I really hope you learned a lot from this league. I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to all of my patrons once again for supporting this content, and stay tuned to the channel because I have a pretty spicy idea. I'm going to make an announcement about over the next couple days. My patrons may have already seen my post regarding it. I'm going to put that idea out to the general public, see what everybody thinks. And of course, as always, we've got more content coming down the pipeline for you. So thanks again for tuning in. As always, let me know what you thought about my decisions here. Let me know what you thought about the matches and the sideboarding and everything else. I look forward to hearing your feedback, and I will talk to you soon. I hope you all have a great night.